Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for participating in this session on tax morale. I am Laura Pereda, who is I am analyst at the OECD. And I want to welcome our presenters. I want to thank our experts for being with us, Peru and Kenya. And I hope that you all find this presentation informative and thought presenting.
So just to introduce what we've been doing here, so tax morale, we're looking at the intrinsic motivation to pay tax, or the non-economic reasons that make people want to comply and participate in the tax system. And we've been working on this for a few years in the OECD now, looking to provide new data and analysis. And we have a big focus on the issues on tax morale in developing countries. Now, we've had 3 publications over the last few years. So our tax morale 1, looking at what drives both individuals and businesses to pay tax, where we use some public perception surveys, and we'll talk a little bit more about and what we'll talk about today is in our new results has basically been updating what we did in that initial 2019 survey, and Rene will talk you through those results. So yes, we did some work on taxpayer education and created a typology of different approaches together with a range of good practices and lessons learned, and that's got a really good kind of database of different types of taxpayer education initiatives. And then our most recent report was looking around the issues around trust between tax administrations and large businesses. And yeah, there's lots of interesting areas that we also kind of touch on a little bit in our presentation today. But I'll now pass over to Rene, who'll talk us through our latest results from our public perceptions work.
Thank you very much, Paula, Joe, and thank you all for being with us today and giving us the opportunity to present the work that Joe has mentioned we've been doing at the OECD on tax morale. Specifically, we wanted to update the latest publication, or the first publication, let's say, on tax morale and the factors or reasons that lead people to have different tax morale actions, and what are the actions that the governments can have on this tax morale. And to make this publication, we have 2 main databases that exist right now. The first one is the World Value Surveys, which is a global focus with data from 2017 to 2022, with different questions and insights that we have used. One of them, which is the one we used to measure tax morale, is: do you justify cheating on taxes if you have the chance? As I said, it's a global analysis, but it's so rich that it allows us to separate in 3 regions: Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And as we are going to see, when separating, we can see there are different dimensions, and it leads us to say going into each national or subnational level could be very interesting. The second database is the Afrobarometer with data from 2019 to 2021. Afrobarometer is very interesting, not only because it talks about Africa, but it has a very interesting battery of questions that allows us to understand better the market. It is so rich that it allows us to use 3 different questions to make an approximation of what's happened. The first is if there are their preferences or they agree to pay higher taxes in exchange of more government services. Number 2 is the importance of using domestic resources for the development. And the third one is legitimation of the authorities to collect taxes. Without further ado, I am going to present the results. The next slide, please. The main results of this World Value Surveys. There are several groups that we divided into 2. One on socio-economic and the other perception of institutions and governments. At first sight, we can see certain interesting results. First, we see that the educational level, age, gender, or religion tend to be positive in terms of tax morale. People with higher education will have higher tax morale, but also there are other relationships like urban or rural in our income levels that can relate to this tax morale. The higher the income, the less the tax morale. Another perception is the institutions, for example, where there are different variables with the preference of redistribution, redistribution, democracies, meritocracy tend to be higher in the tax morale. The interesting thing of this result is that, as I mentioned, this is an analysis that we've been doing throughout time. We did it with data with 2005, 2010, 13, and the results are constant throughout time. Obviously, there are differences or some changes in influence in tax morale, but in general, the results are more or less the same. In the next slide, we can see how we disaggregate Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And we'll see that there are certain similarities, but also differences. To start with, education level and age are still positive variables. However, there are other variables such as religion, for example, has a different weight in the tax morale. In Latin America, it's much more important than in Asia or in Africa. Other variables, like institutional variables, we see meritocracy and support for democracy keep more or less the same average, relatively similar. But if we go to the next group of variables, there are really important variables. Income in Africa doesn't play any role, in Asia more or less, and in Latin America. If we talk about urban or rural, we see that in Latin America, the ratio is negative, but in Asia, it's quite positive. So there are differences that we need to take into account in the different regions. And the same happens with gender. Talking about gender, it's one of the factors that is relatively positive, but throughout our research, we've seen that it's a variable that changes a lot. It's constantly a call, let's say, to go deeper into this research. In the next slide, we will be able to see and focus on the Afrobarometer, which has variables that allow us to focus on specific topics, to continue analyzing socioeconomic topics, the perception of institutions or governments, but it goes a little bit beyond the link with public services and tax morale, which are the green bars below. At first sight, the results show things like trust on government, corruption. If people believe or perceive that there is a decrease in corruption, it is going to make the tax authority more legitimate. Also, a trust, as I said, if there is higher trust in the government, the legitimacy of the authorities or the citizens would be willing to pay more taxes in exchange of services. If they trust the government, they know that they'll get something in exchange. There are other things like the public services or utilities. You can say that legitimacy, those citizens that are happy with the education, infrastructures, or health, clearly tend to have a higher tax morale. There are other things. These are not constant results. For example, in panel A, where we see there are higher taxes in exchange for more public services, there is a certain relationship, a little bit more ambiguous, to lead us to go deeper into these links. And based on these results, we can get to some conclusions, such as thinking about public policies or recommendations that we think could be useful for the government. And Joseph is going to present. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Renee. So we'll just go through what we think some of the policy implications are. So first of all, thinking about some of those socio-economic factors. So I think the first thing to say is there's a limit to what the policy responses can be here. So some of the variables we look at here are outside of administration or government control. So thinking about issues of gender or religiosity, the government can do nothing to affect those variables. But what you can do is think about how you might interpret those variables and how that might affect your policies. So how you may tailor to reflect the specific socioeconomic factors. So thinking especially about the use of taxpayer education policies, for example, to look at specific groups. And some examples might be around higher income earners. So we saw the issues around income, suggesting there's lower tax morale of higher income people, suggest you may want to focus enforcement more at this group, combined with thinking about how you do kind of taxpayer education policies at higher income earners for the long-term impact. Similarly, thinking about the fact that urban residents seem to exhibit some lower tax morale, you may want to think about how policies may look to how your outreach may look to be a bit different in urban areas than it may do in rural areas. And then just coming back to gender, where Renee said we'd had some kind of mixed results over time on this, and the fact that there's more research needed here. We saw some evidence in some of the data from Africa to suggest that there may be some interesting issues to look at in terms of how women perceive the tax authority. So, and we know there's some interesting research being done in Uganda, I think, looking at the way in which tax officials conduct themselves in relation to women. And so thinking at how you can look at the behavior of the tax administration and look to see whether there's issues there in terms of how women are interacting with the tax administration, if there are some serious problems to address, or if there's biases to look at, and how you can then look to address some of those challenges, as well as looking more broadly about how the tax system may have gendered impact. But that's a much bigger topic for another day, I'm sure. But just to say, we think there's scope for some more work there. Looking at the more institutional factors. So again, I think we kind of break things down to think there are some areas that require a more whole of government response. So some institutional factors we look at are big and complex and are going to require long-term responses. So thinking about what was highlighted from Renee around the issues around meritocracy and democracy, changing perceptions on those issues is not primarily a tax issue. So it's not something a tax administration can do too much about. But as a government overall, it probably is something that government may want to think about in terms of how they can improve perceptions on these areas. So it's a part of a much bigger project that will hopefully have a benefit in terms of tax morale. But that's not to say the tax administration can't do anything, because I think our data suggests that there is quite a bit of scope for the tax administration to look at how they can improve tax morale through simplification, increasing the legitimacy of the tax administration, and thinking about taxpayer education. So again, a few examples here. So thinking about building trust. One thing we've seen through some of our work is that building mutual trust is vital. So how you can build the trust both with the taxpayer, but also with the tax administration as well, and thinking about how you can use tools of transparency and accountability to do that. And that's both transparency and accountability of the tax administration, and how that can then encourage transparency and accountability of taxpayers in return. So it really is a mutual process we see there. In terms of digitalization, we know there's a lot of focus on digitalization of tax administration at the minute, and we think that there are some tax morale benefits to come through this. So as you go through the process of simplifying and making the tax administration more efficiency, we think there's a kind of double dividend that will encourage compliance as well. We also see through digitalization there are opportunities to reduce the scope for corruption through digitalization, and certainly improve the trust that there are fewer opportunities for corruption, and so there's potential additional benefits there. In formalization, we see that tax morale may be one of the factors that can influence the decision to formalize. So a lot of this is around the kind of the fear and uncertainty of the tax administration. And we've been doing some work elsewhere in the House at the OECD, looking at the role of presumptive tax regimes as being a potential tool for simplifying that formalization process. And then just lastly, to say the kind of the taxpayer education piece is potentially really important here and we see it as both helping improving the understanding of the tax system, reducing the fear of the tax system, which we think is a big factor, but also, again, if you go to our publication on taxpayer education, there's also a role in terms of how you can assist individuals in the process of complying with tax, and that may especially be important for some of the more vulnerable groups who have difficulty with compliance. And then lastly, just to talk a little bit about the public service delivery. Now, as Rene noted, we only really had data for this from Africa, so some of these, so we don't really have as strong a data set for this, but we think that there is something to say about public service delivery here, and some broad kind of conclusions that we can think of. First of all, in terms of, again, the tax authorities are not primarily responsible for the provision of most public services, and so therefore some of these things are out of the tax administration control. And again, it's a kind of whole of government approach. But I think there is a role to we shouldn't underestimate the impact on tax morale from public service policies, and also thinking about the perceptions are potentially really important, and that's what we see from some of our results. And so you may want to think about how the perception of public services can affect the scope and design of tax reforms, and what it may or may not enable you to do. And again, a few examples that we'd look at here. So in terms of making that link with public services and taxation, there may be some behavioral economics responses that you can get. So in terms of highlighting the role of taxes in funding public services, may be a way to nudge compliance. But this is something that you need to test rigorously before you do, because if there is dissatisfaction with the public services, or a lack of trust that taxes go to fund those public services, then making those links may actually end up destroying tax morale, as people are, as taxpayers may think that they're being lied to in that. So these kind of nudge approaches need very careful consideration and testing before they're put into widespread use. Secondly, just thinking in terms of the quality and impact. And so, we really do see that there is some link there in terms of what that satisfaction in public services is. But again, as Rene noted, in some areas the link may not be so strong. We saw it in Africa, where education was a little bit unclear, and that may be areas where there are significant out-of-pocket expenses to be made by most taxpayers. To get the services that they want. They may not see that link to taxation in the same way. And then just the last thing to say around the public services link is we see a number of countries using hypothecated or earmarked taxes as a way to help gain support for otherwise impossible tax reforms. Now, the economists are always very wary about the use of hypothecated taxes, and there are certainly a lot of reasons why you want to think very carefully before you look at using them. But politically, there are some clear opportunities there, and so I think there's scope to think a lot more about this link between tax morale and earmarked or hypothecated taxes, and what is the best way in which to use them. One thing I would say is you probably only get one chance to use that kind of approach, because if you set up a hypothecated tax and then don't deliver the public service in return, then you're definitely going to destroy trust. And so I think they're a tool that will need to be used with caution. So then just to say, kind of in terms of our next steps, we're this year looking to do a new project in Latin America, which is trying to look at how we situate tax morale in the broader fiscal pact. in the Latin American Caribbean region. And so what we're looking to do is look at some new data and analysis and some more research that we can do. And we're looking to get research both from individuals as well as tax administrations to try and put together a kind of an overview in terms of what is already happening on tax morale, as well as the context that existing initiatives fit in, and then trying to put together some best practices that we can then take through to share in a broader dialogue across the region. So we hope to be in touch with many of you in Latin America in the coming weeks and months, and then as part of our data gathering exercise. And then in the second half of the year, we hope to have a range of dialogues where you'll be pleased to know for most of you in the region that it will be Rene and Paula who will be leading most of those in Spanish rather than myself in English. But we hope that that'll be an exciting project for many of you in the Latin American Caribbean region, and we hope to kind of take the findings more globally as well. So I will end there just with a thanks to our donors who support a lot of this work, and a special thanks to Spain, who will be funding the project in Latin America in the course of this year. So I'll stop there and pass back to Paula. Many thanks.
I'm very glad to introduce our next speaker, Marilu Llerena Ivan. She's the General Manager of Tax Culture from Peru. Marilu will give us a general overview of Peru's efforts to strengthen tax morale amongst the citizens. She will underscore successful experiences and future plans. We're quite enthused to get to know the strategy from Peru. So Marilu, whenever you're ready, please go ahead. Well, thank you, Paula, and good afternoon to all of you. If you please allow me to share my presentation. We wish to greet you all. I thank you kindly. Thank you to the OECD for having invited Peru to share what we're doing to strengthen tax morale. Of course, this is a large challenge, and we're facing situations, as already mentioned in the study carried out by Rene, by Joseph, by all the team. In Peru, unfortunately, the labor informal levels are extremely high. It's a 75% of labor informality during the last household survey, and tax evasion are equivalent of the 20% of public budget, as well as high levels of corruption. They take away 10% of the national budget. This is mentioned by the General Controller's Office. So this is a country with big challenges and opportunities. As a matter of fact, how to build and how to strengthen tax morale under these circumstances. So we wish to share with you what we're doing in Peru. Although we need to strengthen, to build the tax morale, depends on many factors, socioeconomic ones, institutional stakeholders. As a matter of fact, it's quite complex. Nonetheless, in Peru, we wish to create and strengthen tax morale. For this purpose, we need to have a strategic vision as a state, because this goes beyond the tax administration authorities. In Peru at SUNAT, we have a culture on customs and tax, which is aligned to the strategic plan of SUNAT, our tax administration institution. And this is aligned in turn with the Ministry of Finance, because we're trying to increase tax collection and to reduce those levels of informality. Also, we know that the traditional role of tax administration is mainly tax collection and fiscalization. And with regards to the promotion of tax morale, we know that in many countries, it's a complementary tax of tax administration, and it's not quite visible. However, in Peru, we believe that promoting this tax morale needs to be headed, importantly so, by the tax administration at a state level. In other words, if we wish to change this informal culture, we need high-level strategies. And this is a challenge that we face as a state. Concerning this culture plan that we're carrying out annually, we have carried out a series of activities to strengthen tax morale with our students, with entrepreneurs, and our citizens at large. And we know that it's important to be able to be there in person. However, things are complex. We have over 9 million students in different schools, in different universities. In other words, over 400,000 teachers in the different schools. And in Peru, the area that promotes tax morale, we're only 25 individuals. Hence, a key aspect that we're working on, especially in the last few years, is the intensive usage of social networks, digital means, in other words, to be able to convey these messages at a domestic level. For example, there's a web site where you can see talks that take place, and this is something that's important. In other words, everybody needs to take this into account. Now, there's a challenge. Surely, the tax administration do face these challenges, which are the following. We know that the role of our institution to promote this tax morale in our citizenry is quite complex. And in Peru, thanks to the support, the leadership from our collaborators, we've been able almost to triple the amount of citizens that we have reached. It's a challenge that all workers need to be part of it. Locally, our collaborators in our tax administration need to have in their DNA to know that it's important to promote training, to strengthen tax morale as well. We have a volunteering program. We have over 10,000 workers. No, excuse me, 1,000, she said, at a national level. They carry out their work, but in addition, they contribute to reach at a national level. They visit schools. They convey these messages. They're teachers, so that students thereafter, within their own community, might become promoters of tax morale, and to see the benefits of making people comply with their tax obligations, because we all are benefited. And to promote our collaborators, we award them. We call them Transcendency Awards, and we recognize the commitment, the creativity of these volunteers. On this picture, you can see our superintendent. Last year, the award took place. He was the superintendent last year. Hence, locally, as an institution, we clearly need to understand that as tax administration, we need to promote training towards tax morale, heading, of course, and promoting the involvement of different agencies. As a matter of fact, having these strategic alliances with different public and private agencies is something clear. Last year, we approached the Ministry of Education because training on tax morale begins at an early stage in life. In this case, on this picture, you can see the Minister of Education. Last year, she was the Vice Minister. She was promoting tax morale during school age. And in addition, we have promoted, as a matter of fact, there was a legislation in Congress. Unfortunately, this legislation has included tax morale. It has to be declared as a national interest in the curriculum of schools, because, as I said, it's important for our agencies to include in the training of their citizenry this aspect concerning tax payment. And have a look at this graph. You can see the impact of these actions to involve the educational sector more. There has to be laws that declare as important this tax morale, and fortunately, we were able to include tax participation in these courses. So we've conveyed courses to the different teachers, And the figure that you can see here is quite important because from 2017 to 2023, we trained 20,000 teachers concerning fiscal and tax and culture on these matters. So this year, we've reached 32,000 teachers. They're being trained on tax matters. Just imagine, we've done much in the last 5 years. This means that we're addressing the importance of educating on tax matters. It's a challenge nonetheless for the state to win over the trust from their citizens, from entrepreneurs that will promote voluntary compliance for tax payment. People have to be willing to pay taxes because obviously they will feel that they're receiving public services, that tax administration is working with sufficient transparency. So we're seeing at a domestic level, there are different levels of tax morale throughout the country. Hence, how can we convey these messages adapted to each one of these realities? And for the state to be felt that it's near to citizenry. So as a strategy this year, we are promoting at a regional, decentralized matters, meetings to promote tax morale, not only as a tax administration, but as a state, together with the Ministry of Work, with the civil society at large, with the Ministry of Education and the different guilds, because especially at a domestic level, surely this might happen in your countries, tax administration has the largest number of offices throughout the country, so we have to take advantage of the strength. It's very difficult, nonetheless, in the long term to strengthen tax morale in many countries because levels of informality are high in the different countries, but we believe that we will be capable. This is Pedro Veli. He's 80 years old. He has started to export. Initially, he worked informally. Thereafter, he saw the benefits of being formal, and this is important. When a citizen works with a business and realizes that it's more profitable to become formal than informal, it's more profitable to pay taxes because they'll grow. This is an important factor that we're seeing, like, for example, in the case of Mr. Pedro Veli, that exports his arts and crafts to the world. As a matter of fact, at 80 years old, this is his first export. He was supported with the program that we have here at SUNAT, the export program. It wishes to promote these activities. So to strengthen tax administration is a strategic role, as a matter of fact, but we need to have a roadmap. We need to approach citizenry to convey trust, carrying out processes in a simple manner and in a digitalized manner as things are taking place in Peru. Thank you kindly. I believe I'm over. I finished. Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, thank you, Marilu. Thank you for sharing this motivating talk and Peru's strategies. Thank you very much for having shared your outlook. Now, out on the field, by the way.
Now, our final presentation comes from Kenya. Our next speaker is Wanja Wangjondu, Chief Manager of Domestic Taxes at the Kenya Revenue Authority. Wanja will discuss initiatives to improve tax morale and compliance and will showcase policies that have worked well and outline strategies going forward. Wanja, the floor is yours, and we look forward to learning about Kenya's approaches.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon and good evening from Kenya. Indeed, it's already dark outside, as you can see. So now, tax morale is what we're looking at. And we've seen that it is the willingness to pay the taxes. It is actually the willingness of individuals and businesses to comply with tax law and fulfill their tax obligations voluntarily. And it goes beyond the mere legal enforcement and reflect the intrinsic motivation of taxpayers to contribute to the public good through taxation. Now, In Kenya here, we are proactive in addressing tax morale among taxpayers. And one of the key things that we are doing is taxpayer education. We have 47 counties, and we ensure that each of the counties, tax education reaches in each of these counties. And we went out to measure the impact of tax education, and we noted that our tax literacy levels in the year 2018 were at 65%. We did another tax literacy survey in the year 2022, and we found out that the score was actually at 74%, though our score for 2023 was slightly lower, but we have actually seen that increase. In addition to that, we have noted that as we reach out to the people at the grassroots, it increases the number of taxpayers that we recruit, also as we reach out to the informal sector. And what we noted from tax education, when we measured the groups that have been trained, we noted that we increased the number of taxpayers that we recruited from 2017 to 2023 by 105%. So this shows that tax education is one of the measures that actually contributes to improved tax morale. And now the drivers of tax morale, and the basic, what we observe here in Kenya is mainly the element of fairness, because we have noted that when our taxpayers perceive that our tax policies and our tax administration is fair, then they pay taxes with ease. In addition, trust. When our taxpayers trust the government institutions, then we have noted it also increases the tax morale. And what we have noted is when our taxpayers are able to access services like healthcare, education, infrastructure, social welfare programs, then tax morale flows with ease, and the numbers that are willing to pay increases. And the reverse is true as well. Then we have the element of social norms. This plays a crucial role in shaping attitudes towards tax compliance. Community expectations and perceptions of social responsibility influences taxpayer behavior in a great way. And what we have noted here is learn the community. Kenya has 42 tribes. Learn the community, mainly in those areas that are dominated by one tribe, and know what plays best for them. Now, as we are proceeding on, fairness is another key, is one of the things that we talked about. And the perception of fairness is crucial in enhancing tax morale, as we have said. Here, we have noted one of the things that when alternate dispute resolution mechanism was introduced in 2015, at first people were not into it that much. And in the year 2015, only 45 cases were resolved through the alternate dispute resolution. Come the year 2022, 1,031 cases were resolved through the alternate dispute resolution. This is a whole 2,281% growth. So when people see that they have avenues that they can take their dispute to, we have seen a change. So in Kenya, we have the alternate dispute resolution. We have an independent review of objections unit. We have private rulings. We have technical rulings. And we have assessment objections that we make all our taxpayers know about. And this has really increased the morale when they know that there's a place that they can go if they feel not contented with the decision of the taxman. A big thing to talk about, the trust in government institution. Trust in Kenya Revenue Authority and government's management of tax revenue is vital for fostering tax morale. And KRA emphasizes on transparency and accountability in its operations. The authority has a publicly listed citizens delivery charter. And this charter outlines the service level agreements, commitment to the public. And we measure the effectiveness of the citizens delivery charter every month, and we report to an external body. And this has really increased our complaints resolution rate. And we have also noted that the complaints that are coming in from the public are going down. Another thing to do with accountability, we have a channel called iWhistle that people are able to report any malpractice that they would notice. And this has increased the trust that people have in the tax authority, as well as in the government management of their revenues. Now, let's talk about public services. Now, here in Kenya, it's one of the places where people are keen to look into, or the question that many people will ask is, when I pay my tax, what am I getting from the government? And so the accessibility of healthcare, education, infrastructure, social welfare programs, plus trade facilitation is very key. Now, one of the things we noted, we introduced the Authorized Economic Operator Program in the year 2007. Then we only had 11 taxpayers in that program. Over the years, we have had most of our customs, our clients opting for that channel. And as we speak, the numbers have increased with 3,381%. Another thing that we have noted is the time lag in the reduction of the time lags at the points of entry. Initially, the time lag would be 72 hours. As we speak, the clearance at our points of entries is within 6 hours. Another thing that is happening in Kenya is the government is working together. That one government approach whereby the Kenya Ports Authority, the Bureau of Standards, KLA, and all those other bodies that need an attention on when cargoes are coming in or going out of the country work as one. And we have 5 one-stop border points. As we proceed and as we continue moving on, the next one is the cultural norms. The cultural norms and societal expectations play a significant role in shaping the attitudes towards tax compliance. Here, KLA engages in community outreach programs and partnerships in local leaders to align tax compliance with social norms. We have noted sometimes when we reach out to people in tax education in the official languages, that is English and Swahili, it's not taken as serious as when we use the mother tongues, when we go to the grassroots. And so Ushuru Mashinani campaign, or tax at the grassroots, is one of the key strategies that we are applying. We engage the leadership of the various groups at the leadership at the grassroots level. And another thing we have noted, they are indeed becoming our tax ambassadors. In fact, a number of times they provide us with halls, they do the mobilization, and ours is just to deliver the tax education. We are also doing it in a big way whereby we are using the vernacular radios, the TV stations, and we have staff that we have actually employed everywhere in the country and who are helping our taxpayers in onboarding. Another thing, as we come to the end, one of the things that we have noted is that we leverage on the behavioral strategies. Let me start with the first one on policy interventions. We have noted that when a customer raises their voices and mentions about the various tax policies that are there that are not favorable, then we work on those policy elements, because we have noted if our clients feel that we are not fair and we are not transparent in our tax systems, if we do not inform them in public participations and all that, they will not honor the systems that we have. Currently, we are having the system e-Teams that was actually introduced last year. This year, we are actually enrolling it into all the taxes because in the Finance Act, a law was passed that you cannot claim input tax if you do not have an e-Teams receipt. So you can actually see it's actually a countrywide exercise. And we have noted through that involvement and through reminding the people, you actually participated in the public participation. They are owning up as days goes by. The other one is enhancing transparency in tax policies and administration through clear communication and accessible information. And this helps in the building trust and confidence among our taxpayers. We want all our taxpayers to trust our institutions. And so institutional reforms is one of the key things that we are working on in the building trust and confidence in the tax system. And finally, we are leveraging on the behavioral strategies. And you notice this, we have been more on enforcement, and we moved towards facilitation about 8 years ago. And now we are actually moving now closer, whereby nudging the taxpayer technique is what we are applying to enhance compliance. And in response to the low tax morale in our country, we have implemented policy interventions like tax amnesty. So you notice in the year 2014 to 2016, we learned a rental income amnesty. And from this, we actually brought in the property owners who were nowhere in the tax system. Then 3 years ago, we ran a voluntary tax disclosure program. And this program brought in 9.4 billion in revenue. As we speak, we have an amnesty that's running from September to June this year. And this amnesty is basically saying, if you pay your principal tax, then we waive the penalties and interest. For the last 7 months, it has actually brought in 10.52 billion of monies that we were trying to collect, and we could not have a way out to get it. Another thing that we have done here is we have enhanced our online platforms, and we have introduced simplified tax processes. We have platforms like the iTax, the eTeams, and ICMS. And with these platforms, we have seen customers feel they are easier to use. In conclusion, let's recap the key points that we have talked about. And what we have found out is that in Kenya, we must be fair in our tax system. We must increase trust, or we must earn our trust from our taxpayer, and the government must be trusted. Public services must be accessible to our people, and social norms must be understood and applied in a great way. So, colleagues, we have come to learn that working with our taxpayers helps a lot in increasing or in improving tax compliance. Thank you for the opportunity.
Wanja, many thanks for presenting Kenya's initiatives. It is great to learn about the successful policies and plans for the future, and that very insightful theoretical presentation. It has been a pleasure hosting this session, and we have had a very enriching discussion, and I wish you all the best and continued success in promoting a positive tax culture. So thanks again, and goodbye, adios, and au revoir.